Welcome everyone today this is usually Melbourne Waterways and Wetlands Research Seminar that we run. We have a regular seminar series. I'm Rhys Coleman. I'm the Waterways and Wetlands Research Manager at Melbourne Water. What we've decided to do, and I think we should think more about this, is opening it up to others to join in on these seminars. I guess that's an advantage of the situation we're in at the moment, is that we go online and it really creates an opportunity to broaden out who's able to attend these seminars. So it's fantastic to have all of our CRC industry partners and researchers be part of this seminar as well. I think we'll get a whole lot more out of it for it. So welcome everyone. So the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities, it's a 9-year research program for those that who aren't so aware with the CRC. So it's a 9 years research program. So it started in 2012. We're now actually in the final year of the CRC program, of the 9-year program. And it's a little bit hard to believe, I reckon, that we're coming towards the end of this 9 years. I remember when the CRC first got up, I thought, wow, 9 years is a long time. I'm going to be so old when it's finished, its term, and here we are pretty much as we're in the last year. So, and I don't feel that different in my age, but anyway, here we are. So the CRC program, because it's in its last year now, we're actually getting to the pointy end of things, the exciting end of things, where we're able to take all the great research that's happened in the previous years and start to integrate that into tools and products that can help industry make decisions about integrated water management. So that's what's really exciting about now. The program has not just been about the technical solutions, it's also been about the social side of things and understanding the barriers to IWM adoption and how we navigate those to mainstream IWM solutions, upscale IWM solutions. So that's what's exciting about the program, is it's been able to integrate both technology and social science to help support the likes of Melbourne Water to achieve our vision of enhancing life and livability, and how that we integrate IWM projects, concepts, ideas into what we do with our stakeholders. So today is an opportunity to hear about some of these exciting tools and products that are coming out of the CRC program. So we're going to hear from Christian Urick and Malcolm Eadie about the tools and products. So the scenario tool, there's Infill typologies, the Water Sensitive Cities Index, INFFEWS around business cases, financial business cases around IWM projects, and then finally the Restore tool, which has more of an ecological flavour and river restoration flavour. Malcolm's going to start off with an overview of those tools. So sort of a broad overview of the tools and products coming out of the CRC, the ones I mentioned. And then Christian Urick is going to follow up with the deep dive and go in a little deeper around some of the case studies, in particular Fisherman's Bend, and how some of the tools have been applied there, and also how DELP has been using the scenario tool to think about city scale questions. So Christian and Malcolm combined will talk for about 40-45 minutes. So there will be 10 or 15 minutes of official time at the end to ask questions. They have said they're happy to stay on a bit as well. So if we do run out of time and there's some really great questions, we can continue on a little bit if you've got the time. So if you have questions, pop the questions into the chat box. And then as we go, we actually have a whole range of people that could potentially answer those questions as we go. So officially we have Georgie and Slobodanka who can try and answer those questions, but of course everyone feel free to jump in and help out to answering those questions. Any questions we have left over at the end, we'll try and address those. So yes, this is being recorded, so you probably don't have the same pressure of taking notes. You can sit back, enjoy, and look at the recording later on if you need to go back over things. Can I just ask though, just for stability of presentation, when Malcolm starts, and I hand it over to Malcolm and Christian, could you just put yourself on mute if you haven't already, and turn your camera off, and that'll probably lead to a more stable and smoother presentation, I'd say. So I think on that, I will hand it over to Malcolm to give us the overview of the tools. Thanks, Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Reece, and welcome everyone. And also thank you to Georgie Whitnell, our Regional Manager, for helping set up today's session, and Bobber as well. So as Reece said, I will start with a bit of an overview presentation. It won't go into any significant detail on the individual tools, but it should give you a bit of a sense as to the context they get applied in and how they integrate with one another to create a suite or a portfolio of tools. And as Reece said, Christian will sort of get a little bit into the deeper detail on the scenario tool in particular. So I'm going to share my screen. You should see a PowerPoint presentation pop up. Reece, if you can perhaps just, when I do this, turn on your mic and give me a quick yes, all good, then I'm ready to go.
Okay, we're still waiting, Malcolm, but yeah. And all good.
Okay, so we're going to run through the tools and products that the CRC has been developing over the last 9 years. To start, I'll just give a little bit of sort of background context to the concept of a water-sensitive city. I know you're all very familiar with it, but just to sort of shape the relevance of the tools and how they enable the mainstreaming of water-sensitive cities, I'll just start with a couple of slides that just re-establish the context. So the CRC has been working, as Reece said, for the last 8 or 9 years, really addressing some of these key challenges that are facing cities, not only in Australia, but all around the world. So population growth, urban intensification, and as part of that, a general loss of green space and canopy cover. Climate change as a kind of a global issue that's exacerbating impacts of urbanisation, and challenging economic conditions, of which we are deep in those right at the moment. So these are real challenges to which the research has been confronting and addressing as part of that 9-year journey. We know as we transition and intensify our cities, they become hotter, they generate a changed water cycle or water balance that does impact on the health of natural assets and the livability of cities. So community are wanting more from us now. They want livability, resilience, sustainability and productive cities as outcomes into the future. And so the CRC's research has been very much focused on these as outcomes. So a water-sensitive city is really about delivering that aspiration or that future for community. What does it look like? Well, it looks fairly different to how we've been doing things in the past. It employs new building typologies, different land use and water planning to revalue the built form, the green space, the blue-green infrastructure, and how that works to actually create those livable, resilient and sustainable outcomes. And we know if that's done well and it's done in a properly integrated way, then our cities will be cooler. They'll be more livable, the natural assets will be more resilient and create greater benefits for people living in those cities. So the benefits of a water-sensitive city approach are more cost-effective use of underutilised or wasted water sources, greater productivity from existing infrastructure, or indeed avoiding expensive capital upgrades of infrastructure, reduce flood damages and other insurance burdens, reduce community health impacts around morbidity and mortality from urban heat, for instance, avoided or reduced restoration costs to urban waterways and adjoining rivers and bays, and an overall improvement in the health and livability of urban communities. So we know water-sensitive cities are the way to go. The tools and products are really there as instruments to help us deliver that future. So over the last 9 years, the CRC's research has been working towards delivering these tangible outcomes that enable practitioners to transition cities to that water-sensitive future. And the tools and products are really organised in this platform or continuum, if you like, of city planning, from vision and strategy development at the highest level or city shaping level, through to tools that assist planning and assessment at neighbourhood, precinct levels, down to local levels, and tools that help designers implement new built forms, new infrastructure forms, and new waterway restoration techniques. So that suite or portfolio of tools and products that have been developed by the CRC all work as an integrated suite to drive the transitioning of cities towards water-sensitive outcomes. So I'll step through each of those in order, starting at the vision and strategy level, working through to design and implementation. So vision and strategy, we have two main tools that the CRC's developed to help in that process. The first is our Water Sensitive Cities Index. Many of you would be aware of the index. It's a web-based tool to measure the current performance or status of a city or a municipality in respect of water-sensitive city goals and indicators. And the Transition Dynamic Framework is a framework that then enables the visions that are associated or developed from that indexing process to be implemented through strategy and actions. So those two tools sit within a 5-step or a 5-module planning process that the CRC has developed, or transition process, which starts with understanding the system or understanding your city in the water cycle, which is where the index is used. Moving into an envisioning and narrative building stage, which is getting that shared vision and aspiration agreed across stakeholders. And then moving into the transition planning phase, which enables that coalition of stakeholders to then do integrated collaborative planning to implement and operationalise the vision. So as I mentioned, the index is a web-based tool which effectively is used through a facilitated workshop process, which is facilitated by accredited providers. And through that process, stakeholders, a broad cross-section of stakeholders come together and through a deliberative process, assess in a consensus sense how they feel their city or their municipality is performing against the goals of a water-sensitive city. And there's a couple of benefits from the process. It's actually a fantastic opportunity to bring disparate stakeholders together in and around a common planning agenda where they may not often get the chance to do that in their day-to-day work. And through that, it builds strong relationships that can be enduring as part of the long-term delivery of a water-sensitive city. And the outcome of the index process is it provides a snapshot of how a place, a city or a municipality is currently performing in relation to the goals that define a water-sensitive city. It reveals where there's strengths and where there's weaknesses and gaps and enables an early focus in on where the priorities should be for strategic planning and action planning. It also produces some outputs that are highly visual and useful in communication, particularly with community and elected officials, to help get that broad buy-in to the transition journey. Once you kind of know where you're at and you've developed the vision and a shared vision as to where you want to go, the next tool that the CRC's developed is its Transition Dynamics Framework, which is a structured framework to really evaluate, have you got all of the pieces in play that are going to create an enabling environment and the supporting environment to be able to successfully implement and operationalise your vision. And this Transition Dynamic Framework really maps the 6 sort of stages that you classically progress through when you're introducing a new paradigm or a paradigm change. From issues emergence as an early stage, issues definition, a shared understanding across stakeholders, building knowledge and disseminating that knowledge broadly, with the confidence and trust that comes from that building the policy directions and settings that diffuse practice more broadly, and then finally having that practice mainstreamed and fully embedded. That's the trajectory that a transitional process needs to move through. But there's a range of enabling factors that ensure that's successful, including the important role of champions and advocates, the platforms that connect those champions and advocates together to create coalitions that strengthen the resolve to continue to deliver, the knowledge that builds over time and how that gets shared, the projects and demonstration projects that build the evidence base and the trust broadly, and finally the instrumentation through policy and guidelines that embed it deeply. So this framework, it's mostly common sense, but it's a fantastic framework to ensure you cover all the essential bases and don't leave gaps in the framework. Critical gaps can often lead to not successfully getting to full mainstreaming, embedding in new practice. So those tools really help the framing up and shaping of a city's transition to a water-sensitive future. And many cities across Australia and municipalities have applied those tools and are well on their journey to water-sensitive futures. And indeed, international cities are now employing those tools to commence their journeys as well. So once you know where you want to get to and you've got the broad strategic planning and coalitions in place to deliver that, the next suite of tools are really helping to operationalise that vision. And these tools really focus on ensuring that the integrated planning that needs to be done to provide the direction and the detail to be able to get on-ground outcomes is done in the best way possible through integrated planning frameworks. We have tools that enable us to do scenario testing and do what-if testing of different future possibilities, both in terms of built form and urban infrastructure and how they influence the performance of a city into the future. And we have economic tools that can actually look at those alternative scenarios and provide the economic evidence base to make confident decisions on investments into future city making. So I'll step through each of those quite quickly. In terms of integrated land and water planning, this has been a challenged area for years, with water often sort of planned as a response to a land use plan that's already locked in. This piece of research is really trying to better integrate consideration of water into land use planning right from the start. The research is still in progress on this one, but it will be producing a guidance manual that will present a conceptual framework that can help properly structure up integrated land use and water planning, the collaborative processes and methods that get used through that framework or process, and the specific guidance for policymakers and planners and the governance arrangements that are associated with that. And the research will document a series of case studies that demonstrate how that framework gets applied with some key learnings and case examples from specific locations across Australia. So after you've done fantastic precinct planning and framework planning and you've got water sensitive cities principles deeply embedded in those, the next step is to start to employ evaluation tools such as the Water Sensitive Cities Scenario tool, which really enable live and rapid evaluation of alternative future development and infrastructure provision scenarios, and to measure the performance of those against some classic water sensitive cities indicators such as urban heat performance and urban water cycle performance. The CRC's Water Sensitive Cities Scenario tool is a web-based tool that enables stakeholders to come together, rapid scenario planning and get rapid results back to get confidence around decisions that get made in terms of policy planning and infrastructure decision making. It works in that it enables in a GIS environment the articulation of future urban development scenarios or typologies and different blue-green infrastructure responses that can be implemented to support those future development scenarios. It's a highly graphical and interactive platform that enables urban form to be visualised, and how you then implement within that urban form blue-green infrastructure and then measure its performance against indicators such as urban heat, land surface temperature and air temperature, and also the water balance performance of those future scenarios. And through this very rapid analysis process, you can test a whole range of different possible future scenarios to measure how they're going to perform against some of those policy and planning aspirations that are set in the earlier stages. So once you've done that sort of quantifying the biophysical benefits, the next step and the next tool, in fact, is the economic assessment tools that the CRC's developed in order to be able to evaluate the economic costs and the economic benefits of undertaking water-sensitive cities solutions. And the INFFEWS tool, as it's known, is the CRC's tool for doing this, and it's got two major components to it. It's got a classic benefit cost analysis tool, and it's supported by a valuations tool, which is captures a significant amount of research to look at the non-market values associated with a lot of the benefits of water-sensitive cities, and provide a basis and a justification for how those values can be recognised in the benefit cost analysis with a monetised value. A real strength of the INFFEWS tool is its ability to kind of disaggregate where costs and benefits accrue and to who. And so as a sort of highly visible tool for stakeholders, it breaks down those costs and benefits and indeed is able to articulate who shares those. And this is really important from the perspective of building future funding and finance models for investment in blue-green infrastructure, for instance, based on where the benefit's going to accrue. So we've got a suite of tools that help that process of neighbourhood and local planning and decision making. The next suite of tools help designers who are tasked with implementing solutions on the ground, be it new urban form or typologies, or new ways of restoring waterways or blue-green infrastructure, whether it's passively watered street trees or green walls and the like. The two tools I'm going to just present very quickly now is the Infill typologies and performance evaluation framework and the restore tool. So the infill development, and as we know, a significant amount of the urban intensification in our major cities is not greenfield, it's infill development, and that is often called the missing middle. It's an area of particular focus of the CRC in looking at new typologies of built form. How do you achieve the density aspirations that a city has with new forms of buildings and building typologies that can accommodate those higher populations but deliver a more livable, greener, cooler and more sustainable urban environment. So the CRC's developed an urban infill typologies catalogue which really defines a series of new typologies at different scales and different contexts that can be considered by architects and urban designers and developers who are working in that missing middle. And associated with those typologies is an evaluation framework that can assess the performance of those typologies against some water-sensitive cities outcomes. In this instance, this framework looks at some architectural or urban form outcomes, which are subjective and qualitatively measured, and some specific and urban heat outcomes. And so this framework, and there's a water mass balance spreadsheet tool that supports it, enables architects, urban designers and planners working in that missing middle to provide justification for the performance of their proposals. And this can be used back against building regulations and policies that a local government might have. And finally, the Restore tool, which is a spreadsheet-based tool to help rapid decision-making in prioritising investments in waterway health outcomes and ecological outcomes. It's effectively a tool that looks to prioritise what are the key ecological attributes of a local waterway or stream or bay, for that matter, that have the greatest opportunity for benefit from restoration investment. And based on that, walks through a whole range of different ways you can get the maximum benefit with a series of questions framed in a spreadsheet tool and 13 fact sheets supporting the answering of those questions. So it's a tool, again, that's there to sort of enable multiple stakeholders to come around an issue quickly without having to deep dive into significant evaluations, and arrive at some quick priorities as to where to direct investment to get the greatest ecological gain. So that's the Restore tool. So I've presented the range of tools that the CRC's got and is mostly now accessible for industry to start to access and use. In summary, the benefit of this is that through these tools, we're addressing a series of gaps and issues. So we're providing the evidence and the frameworks that are required to help us all move away from business as usual and towards that water sensitive future. The tools are supporting a more collaborative process, a multi-stakeholder process, and gaining that communication across sectors and stakeholders. And they're underpinned by robust science and evidence base. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing. And I might hand over now to Christian, if you're there and able to get your presentation up, Christian.
Yeah, gonna get it up now. Thank you, Malcolm. No, where is it? Can everybody see that?
Yep, that's good, Christian.
Yep. Great, thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. I think you have seen that the CRC has developed quite a lot of tools and a lot of a range of challenges. And the scenario tool is one of the tools that is helping and is designed for helping with these planning questions. How can we do integrated planning a bit more efficiently, also to find a more water sensitive solution, in particular on that precinct scale, but also then scaling up to an overall city scale. I would like today to give you a little bit of an overview through those two applications that we have prepared for that. Now, just in a nutshell, to what we're aiming to do with that tool, it's really to evaluate concepts, design, different technologies and different policies. So the tool itself is not about detailed planning questions in that sense. It's kind of, you still have your expert tools to solve those. But it helps you to identify at a broader level which strategies might be effective and which type of solutions to pursue and develop in detail a bit further. Now, some of the key elements that have been integrated in the tool to make it useful at that scale is really teasing out this multi and interdisciplinary planning aspects. One has been major new tools developed by the CRC around urban heat. So this links to land surface temperature, which we see here, but also air temperature assessments that are really readily available in the tool that you can apply that for your planning questions. The other element is tying into that is the urban water cycle. And obviously heat and water are related in that sense. If we have a drought, we can't irrigate plants. That has issues in terms of heat island effect and so on. And providing this water is crucial. But also then identifying new integrated solutions in that. So it's kind of how can we use stormwater runoff more efficiently through water recycling, as well as wastewater as well, and really exploring that lot scale to city scale interactions a bit better. And another aspect is coming in is really tying that in with the urban form itself. So understanding that we can actually, not just as Malcolm was mentioning, planning water as an afterthought in the design of new precincts, for example, but really being part of that conversation and rapidly being able to test new urban form ideas. Could be around placement of trees, parcel densities, would it make sense to go for a lower or a higher density? And really now teasing out what it means for urban heat, for the water cycle, as well as some of the other aspects there. And with those suite of models that have been integrated in this tool, this is what we're basically aiming for, that you can assess these multiple benefits of those infrastructure solutions. That is really for this supporting rapid scenario testing and planning, as well as a more collaborative way of making those decisions. As well as Malcolm mentioned, the tool itself is web-based, has lots of visualizations as part of that website as well, and most of the visualizations you see in the presentation itself are straight out of the tool itself. So it is a way to communicate and also to interact with those results. And then also to provide that in the next step, then information that you want to feed in some of the other tools that the CRC has produced to make those robust policy decision and business cases. And then what also, I think that's probably close to my personal research, is making things, those tools easier to use. So really bridging that gap between data and models, and quite quickly being able to come up with case studies and answers, to not have to develop month to month of time in data gathering and model development, but really focus on the solution development itself. Now, the first case study I would like to zoom in and also then show a little bit some of the functionality of the tool is Fisherman's Bend. I want to, here's an exclaimer for that, is more mock-up of that case study itself. So it kind of has not been calibrated for this particular case, but it should give you an idea of how you can actually use and apply that tool. Now, this is the case study. So what's the first element that you can do in the tool? And this is the visualization here. You basically define the region that you're operating in. So the tool is set up for Melbourne metropolitan area, and we also have all the data available now for all of Victoria. So you basically just run, can get going, set up your case study. And with that, being able to run, in this case, we use the land surface temperature assessment, but also extracting a lot of the base information that you need for your models. We can see here building footprints and other details. And that helps you to, it's probably not that interesting for Fisherman's Bend itself, but for other case studies, to assess what's the current situation on ground. So what are your different land cover fractions, different runoffs, current heat conditions that you're operating in. This is what we call, it's a limited, but again, it's still a digital twin that you can start working with. The saying it integrates those data around urban form, land cover information, which we are using from Geoscape. So if you have a license for that, you can use that readily available. Otherwise, you can talk to the Water Sensitive Cities Institute that has quite good arrangements with Geoscape partners as well. We have other open data that we can find around elevation, soil data, as well as links to census data. So you get this demographic information in your case studies. We also integrate in climate data that you need. So these are your typical time series around rainfall, but also then later on temperature data that you need to run the target models and other automatic detection of heat wave days and so on for those assessments. And then link to some of the CRC research outputs, for example, typologies and design templates that you can use and some of those ideas. And we provide lots of interfaces. So if you want to use the tool yourself in your own areas, so you can upload your own zoning, your own data and interface with that to operate it in your own environment. Now back to Fisherman's Bend, how it would look like. We're zooming in onto one of those precincts, residential precinct that's being developed. So you define that area, and then it basically daylights all the base information. Now, what we do in the next step is we basically, out of the precinct structure plans and other information, we're coding up the land use that we're expecting there, including what the built form might look like. This is done in the same algorithmic way. So you have basically rules how you can describe that, and quite rapidly, so you can see here, develop the massing of those buildings. Now also here, disclaimer, the tool itself is not meant to be used for urban planning and create those really flashy visuals that we see from the architects and so on, but it's designed for us to give us, in terms of the water and the heat modeling, the parameters that we need around roof areas, tree covers, and so on. So this information is readily available. And then we can do some basic information that we usually need to assess those case studies already. So for example, out of this, we can read what's the impervious footprint that we expect, and so on. Now from here, we then run the land surface temperature model. The land surface temperature model itself is an empirical model, so it's based on measurements that have been done in Melbourne. And it's really fast, but also quite simple. So this is why we recommended to use it for hotspot assessment. So it helps you really to start to zoom in those areas where you have might have challenges on a large scale. We see later on, it has been quite useful also on a city scale to identify these hotspots. And as you can see here on that map, nicely coming out, the green spaces that have been implemented here in blue, which are roughly 20 degrees in terms of land surface temperature cooler than we would what we see around the really high densities around roads and roof areas in the catchment. Now in the next step, then we run the target air temperature model. So target itself is now, it's a physical based model. So it adds way more detail to the assessment, and it can assess air temperature as well as human thermal comfort. And it does this, we can see here, basically it does this cell by cell. Here it's visualized the maximum day temperature in terms of that we get for one of the heat waves that we have here. And we can see also the spread again, whereas in the for those green areas, it's 39.4 degrees, where it then goes up in some of the hotspots to almost 43 degrees. You can see there's a 2 to 3 degree difference in terms of the cooling that we can get from those green systems. And one of the really nice things about target is that it simulates in an I think top of my head, I think it was a half-hour time step over 3 days. So you can see the build-up of the heat during a heat wave, but also then the cool down, and you can take that into account in your assessments. From there, we move then into the water cycle model. Now the water cycle model itself, so this is the summary figure that we see here. It operates at it's a conceptual model that operates at a lot scale level detail at a 24-hour time step. So that gives us, it's not for a detailed assessment, you would still need to run your other models, but it gives us a good overview of what is happening in the catchments, and then produces all the values that you see here. It is able to consider those different storages that we have, rainwater harvesting tanks, grey water recycling, but also then the interactions and how that will work on the next scales if you have sub-catchment storages and so on, and solutions, and being able to explore really how we can actually connect those different streams to optimize the integrated water cycle. And in total, which you don't see here because it's summarized, we consider up to 11 different streams that you can manipulate and work with here. Now, this is basically the base assessments that we always run. So if you change the scenarios, all those models are then basically executed after each other to get that integrated perspective. Now, in this case, one of the options they wanted to look into was this green spine. So basically along really major transport corridors, what can we do to remove and reduce that impact that we get from these massive road surfaces, and can we use that as a transport corridor also for water, as well as creating those amenity benefits that we see here. And we've set that up in the model, so basically draw that up around the transport corridors, and then you can see here obviously a massive impact on the land surface temperature already, so quite a significant reduction. And also quite importantly, it's probably a bit hard to see on that, but it shows you for air temperature, it's quite a significant impact as well. So we see here between a 1 and 2 degree difference. Now this is quite a large effect in terms of air temperature reduction, and this is definitely has some positive aspects of that. And also, if you can imagine, if you walk along those pathways, then the shading effects that provides and so on, this is, can be quite significant. But then also, if we look at the profile over those 3 days, we can see then in the whole catchment that this is contributing to a roughly 0.6, 0.7 degree reduction at its peak. But there's also one of the effects that we can see there's a slight increase in nighttime temperature. And this is because if you have a lot of water in the catchment, which those green solutions suggest, as well as green infrastructure there, those cool down less rapidly than you would see that, for example, from those concrete surfaces. So this is basically some of the results that Target is gonna give you. Now we also can look into what would that green spine mean in terms of the water cycle. Now the effect here is obviously not too large because we're just looking at that corridor itself, but we can observe here that we get a bit more infiltration, a bit less runoff because we have reduced impervious area, but we also see a more evapotranspiration in that catchment because we have more green infrastructure in place. The other element which we haven't touched on here is then basically that we have used passive irrigation for those systems, so there's no additional imported water. Some of the other scenarios we looked into is now really in the more unpacking the complexity of the water cycle. And as I said, it's operated at a lot scale, but I want to show you here some of the summary results. So some of the ideas is first, let's start to look into what could you do with rainwater harvesting. Obviously here with the high-rise buildings, the proportion between how much water demand you have compared to how much you collect out of roofs is obviously relatively small. So you can see it still has an effect, but it's not that huge as you would expect, for example, in the more suburban areas. And we can also then look into, but that is interesting, and the storage behavior, since we're simulating that at that scale. And that gives a bit of an indication, because what was intended also in Fisherman's Bend was, could those storages be used for, to help with flood protection? So to have that, and it looks like that might be a promising solution and the way forward for that. Now, the other option here is then definitely grey water recycling. We used it here at a precinct scale. Oh, sorry, wastewater recycling. And there's quite a significant portion of water could be recycled and potentially reused in the catchment. And in this case, we assumed it to be used for non-potable use as well as for outdoor demand. So you can see it's had quite a massive impact then on how much water you need to import, as well as how much wastewater you're going to produce. And this is a small snapshot, and you have multiple ways of how you can now combine those storages, prioritize use, and so on, of how you want to optimize that in the catchment. I just want to jump then, basically one note as well. So the tool itself, all the graphs that you have seen and all the visuals, they're basically sitting on this online dashboard. There are a few screenshots of that, and it's an interactive way of how you can set up these scenarios. It's still technical, I have to acknowledge. It's not as easy as I personally would have hoped, but it is much easier than some of the other expert tools, and you get that. So it runs online, you get the results back, you can deep dive into the results and really unpack some of the challenges and some of the opportunities then there. Now, next I want to zoom out a little bit from the smaller scale applications to then a more large scale application. And this was then across Melbourne, metropolitan Melbourne, to understand urban heat island effects. And this is particularly a challenge in terms of urban growth. And this is one of the typical middle ring urban form topologies that we get. What we simulated here was the urban infill development that we would expect into 2050. When we say we want to put in 70% of the population should go within the existing urban footprint. And this is now really extrapolating out what we see currently happening on ground. And you can see this is just a massive turnover of properties, but also much higher density, which has an effect. And this is what we explored in this project. What is the impact of that on tree cover change, impervious change, but then also then for urban heat, if we continue with the trend on as business as usual. And we explored that, as said, for greenfield, but in this case, I also want to talk more about the infill development application. So in total, we looked at 3 scenarios. So what is the current challenge if we would extrapolate that out? Is there a maintain scenario where we can maintain current tree cover? And what would that policy look like? And in this case, we, in a nutshell, it was you just said 1 tree per lot policy. And then also what would a green city scenario look like, where we upgrade tree canopy in public spaces along transport corridors and roads, but also have then more than one tree on some of the lots as well. I want to just show you some of the snapshots of the results that we get here. So the simulation has run out at parcel level, so we're subdividing those. But I want to present you what the impact would be on overall Melbourne. So one of the first results is just being able to visualize all the tree cover, and there's no surprises in that. I guess we get that increase in tree canopy towards the Yarra ranges, whereas in the western corridors, there's almost no trees there. And it's a bit hard to see when you compare those, but this will be the tree cover change to 2051. But if you create the difference of those, you can see that particularly in those middle ring suburbs where we have this intense development pressure, this is where we see a lot of loss of tree cover. That means here a minus 0.1%, so a 10% tree cover change means in total the tree cover will drop from today, where it's 20%, for example, down to 10%. So this is quite significant. This also then starts to trickle through into the impervious footprints as well. Now, overall, the change might not be that large, but we're seeing some of these hotspots increases of more than 20% of the impervious area, which then, when there are already flash flood issues in place, might have some significant impacts there. But also in terms of the pollutant loadings that we could expect coming through that. So this is just something to think about, I guess, with those infill developments. Now from here, what we were interested in is kind of how does that affect the land surface temperature change? And we can see then across Melbourne they increase, obviously. Now what we then interested in was actually mapping that back onto the heat exposure. And the idea behind that is that we are looking into what are the hottest areas today, okay, and how would those expand into the future. And this is the idea that if we have a heat wave coming through, those areas that are here in red will experience more significant air temperature. So the effect of that heat wave will be amplified in those areas. And then we can count the population living in those. This is not intersected with the vulnerable population. Okay, so this is not identifying now where do the elderly live and other exposed populations, but it's just purely mapping where the air temperature would be higher during those heat wave days. And this will be in the year 2018. So this is how it would look today. And this is how it would expand into the year 2051. And now you have two effects coming in. You have an increase of the land surface temperature, so of that air temperature that we get. Plus we have more population living in those areas, which then has quite a significant impact of how many people are potentially exposed to heat risks. Now, some of the summary results then, what we could show then here is these tree cover loss, and this is in square kilometers here that we would see across metropolitan Melbourne. So we're talking about in a business as usual scenario up to 20 square kilometers of tree canopy, which is a lot. With the maintain scenario, so if you use the infill development as an opportunity to mandate, for example, a tree per lot, you could almost see a slight increase even. And then with the green city scenario, which has additional measures in that, we can significantly uplift what we see today. And then this here would be the population numbers. And we can see here that sharp increase that we would get if we are not compensating for some of those effects that we see today. And also then the impact that these mitigation measures might have. One element I want to highlight here, and probably bring it back to water sensitive cities. We also then did a sensitivity study on looking into what a fictive drought scenario would mean. So this is if we wouldn't have water available to water at least half of our public spaces or residential areas. And we could see then basically through the dry grass, through the drying out of the environment, we have just a massive increase of population that might be at risk. And this is then really then highlighting that it's really about how can we actually tap into the water cycle and make the water available during those scenarios when we need it as well. This was just a bit of a snapshot of those different applications, first at the precinct scale and then zooming out onto the city scale. Now you can get access to the tool. So it is available for all CRC participants. You find here the link. The water cycle model that you have seen is currently with our testers and getting some fantastic feedback. We're going to make that available in September. And we have monthly trainings with the tool that you are more than happy to join. So if you register on the website, you get an update when those trainings are coming up. But we're also happy to, if an organization is interested or if Melbourne Water is interested, to have a more of a deep dive to run individual training sessions as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Christian, and for Malcolm. Terrific overview of the tools there, Malcolm, and it's good to get an understanding of what they can do and how they all fit together. So it was great to have that overall picture. And then thanks, Christian, for the deep dive with Fisherman's Bend and Melbourne and the DELP study. I think it's one thing to hear about the tools, but it's so valuable to really see an example of how they're applied. So I think that was terrific. So thank you to you both. Hopefully people have noticed as well, during the presentations, Georgie's been putting in links to the various tools that are being talked about. So please check those if you haven't already, so you know where to find out more. But yeah, thanks so much for your presentations. So the questions have been coming in. I think we've officially got 5 minutes left, but Malcolm and Christian said they're happy to stay on a bit. So for those people that have to go in 5 minutes, thank you for attending, and hopefully we see you soon. And then for those that can stay on, then we'll stay on. So I noticed some questions coming through. So I think the first one was Stephen McKellar had a, let's have a look here. I'll just open this up so I can see a bit more. Is it possible to access a copy of the Fisherman's Bend and Melbourne analysis to look into it further?
As I said, it's more of a mock-up, but we can definitely give access to that. That's kind of how it's set up, to have a bit of a look and feel for it and how it works. Probably would need for if you want to actually base your decision making on that, would probably be a little bit more work in terms of some of the details there. The Melbourne analysis at the moment, this is with the Department of Water itself, going through the approval processes. So this is not public available yet, but I know there has been some interest internally with DELP, but also with some of other projects to potentially discuss making the data available to some extent, if that's possible or not. But that's not finalized yet, those processes. But more than happy in terms of sharing Fisherman's Bend, some of those insights there and exploring those scenarios a bit further.
Okay. Great, thanks, Christian. And Stephen had another question about the future projections. Are they using the CRO projection data? I guess that's VCP19 or something like that, or have you used something else?
Yes, in this case, we are not using any projections for the heat waves and for the temperature data itself. So basically the statements that we only make is that those areas are going to be hotter during those heat wave periods, but we haven't used any climate projections to actually assess the increase in those heat waves that we will get in terms of their duration, but also in their intensity. But this is something that could be explored. So through Target, there is the possibility then to say we take that urban form as it looks like in 2052 and then feed it with the climate projections, and then also start to understand the effect of the more intensifying and more frequent heat waves. But this is then basically, that's still work that would need to be done.
And Tanya has a question about, this might be for you, Malcolm, about the pricing, accessing the tools, how does licensing work? Can you maybe talk a little bit about the thinking there? Yeah,
sure. Look, for a number of the tools, all the spreadsheet tools should be accessible through the CRC's website as a sort of a knowledge portal to access those. At this point, for partners of the CRC, those tools should be accessible and usable as is. For non-partners, we're still in the process of developing the IP transition pathways for the tools as they come out of research into a commercial environment. So on that, I can't give specific details, and I guess if anyone's interested in accessing and using the tools now, to talk to me, and we can interim arrangement while we're formalising a longer-term commercial one. Just in terms of the scenario tool, Christian mentioned that the scenario tool has geoscape data as a kind of a foundation geospatial layer for some of the land cover information. And the Water Sensitive Cities Institute, the subsidiary of the CRC, has a license arrangement with the provider of that database. And our arrangement with them is rather than individual municipalities or interested parties separately seeking licenses and getting data direct from the supplier of that data, it can be done through the Water Sensitive Cities Institute. And we've got a sort of a standing agreement with the provider as to how to sort of price that and pass that cost through. But it just saves a lot of time. And we've already cleaned that data up so that it's kind of fit for purpose and ready to go for the modelling. So that's on that one. But outside of that, the scenario tool's set up to enable local GIS data that a council might have to be uploaded if they want to use that data in lieu of the geoscape data or whatnot. So there's a few options there, I guess. We're trying to make the data side of it not a barrier or an impediment to the efficiency and ease of use. So I think we've structured a sort of an arrangement with the data providers to ensure that there's not a sort of a time cost in getting the models set up and ready to be used.
Okay, great. And so I noticed there, Georgie's just saying if people are having trouble accessing anything, to get in contact with Georgie. And there's her email there. I guess before we do wrap up though, I think maybe some people might be wondering about the rollout of these tools. So Christian, you kind of highlighted with the scenario tool that there'd be, some training and so on. What about the other tools? What's the plan for the next 12 months to sort of roll these tools out, train people up, build awareness? What's the thought there?
Yeah, so there's a range of things in place to support the rollout and the building of communities of practice and the training and the accessibility. So through the various portfolios of the CRC, the adoption portfolio, which Jamie Hewitt is now leading up, is kind of working through that process of building communities of practice and through that the training and accessibility of the tools. And my role is really looking at how the long-term hosting of those tools and the support and accessibility and the ongoing maintenance and development of those tools will be taken on once the CRC completes middle of next year. So we're in the middle. Just bear with us for a few months as we sort of plan that transitioning phase, and we'll have a more certain picture as to how what that looks like, and then how industry more broadly can actually access not only the tools to use, but the training and the support and the various commercial aspects that will go with that.
Yeah, okay. Did you want to add something, Jamie?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I've literally just this morning got off the Zoom call with the regional managers, so Georgie and the others, and we had this very conversation about the tools and those sorts of things and the training. So I've got a budget line set aside for that. So that's one of our priorities for this year, particularly between sort of now and Christmas, or now when we're going to have our final conference for the CRC, so an early plug for that. That'll be in March next year. So we're going to hit training and communities of practice pretty hard on that. And we'll be looking for the regional advisory panel. So Reece, you're on the regional advisory panel for Victoria. They'll be able to give us some specific direction on which tools will be the biggest priorities and what the best training opportunities are. So it might look a bit different in Melbourne than it does in, say, Sydney or Perth and those sort of things. But that's how we roll in the CRC, so that's all fine.
Okay, great. So it sounds like there's a little bit of work to do around the planning of that, but pretty soon we'll start to hear about what that might look like going forward. Great. Now, I can't see any more questions in the chat box there. So I think we might be wrapping up there. So I'd just like to thank you. Yes, Malcolm and Christian, thank you again for giving your time to tell us about these tools. As I said, the pointy and exciting end of the CRC to get all the research into these tools and to see how the research can help us make decisions. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to Georgie and Bobba for organising the seminar and doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff. and thanks to everyone else for your attendance. I hope you got a lot out of it. It was certainly good for me to see how all the tools are coming together and fitting together. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and stay safe, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.